Clock.
Recording in progress.
Should I start again? Okay, all right. I'll call this workshop for Desert Water Agency's Board of Directors on June 4th, 2025 at 1 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. Some housekeeping. Ask that people in the room silence their mobile devices, and anyone who might be attending virtually to keep your microphones muted until you're ready to speak during public comment. And for discussion and questions, I'll call on directors in the following roll call order: Director Gracia, Director McKenna, Secretary Treasurer Bloomer, Vice President Bowman, and President Ortega. And with that, we can go to item number 2 on today's agenda, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. And I ask Secretary Treasurer Bloomer to lead us in the pledge. Thank you. Right. May we have the roll call, please?
Director Gracia,
Present.
Director McKenna,
Present.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer,
Present.
Vice President Bowman.
I'm here, and I must say up front, I have an important doctor's appointment, and I will not be here for the full duration, and I apologize, but it was one of those appointments that I had to take it then, so forgive me.
All right.
And President Ortega.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. Item 4 is public comment on items listed on the agenda. So this would be a time for members of the public to come forward and speak about the item that's on today's agenda. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Have we received any public comment?
No public comments have been received.
And are there any members of the public who would like to speak at this time? Seeing none, we can move to item 5, which is our discussion item. And we'll start with Director Yort. Thank you.
Thank you, President Ortega. Good afternoon, members of the board. Thank you for joining us today for a board workshop to discuss making conservation a California way of life. Some very quick, brief, high-level remarks. Just going to introduce our presenters for today: Clark Elliott, Conservation Manager, as well as Ernie Valenciano, Senior Conservation Specialist. So yesterday, Clark at the board meeting gave you all a little bit of a teaser or preview of today's conversation. And essentially the goal and the outcome, or why we're having this conversation, is to give you a status of where we are with this regulation, as well as the steps we've taken thus far, and also to gather more input and feedback and thoughts from the board about some of the elements that Conservation Manager Elliott will discuss today. So the whole point of today is also for it to be an interactive conversation. So if you have questions, please, as Conservation Manager Elliott is discussing, either note them, but we'll be pausing at every slide to ask for questions, because we want to make sure, since it's very dense, that we're all on the same page and that we can address questions on the slides versus going back, and perhaps that can create some misunderstanding 10 slides down the road. So with that, I will toss it over to Conservation Manager Elliott. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
All right. Good afternoon, directors. I am here to talk a little bit about making conservation a California way of life. So we can go ahead and start with the first slide. It is exactly the same as what you saw. Oh, excuse me. Never mind. It's not. This is our agenda for the day. So this is what we're covering, more or less, if you just need a little bit of structure, or if you need to ever go back and kind of discuss or think about what we already talked about, or if you have any questions down the road and you want some reference on what we are doing or a specific program. So with that, I will go to the first slide, which should be exactly the same as what you saw at our previous board meeting, just to give you a really quick high-level overview. Making conservation a California way of life is split between 2 major components: urban water use objective, the budget, and CII performance measures, the things that we need to do for our businesses. decrease in 2030, 2035, and 2040 for that budget. And the budget is split between residential indoor use, residential outdoor use, real water loss, CII landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters, and variances, for us, the major one being our seasonal population. I will say, if anyone has any questions here, we want to make sure everyone's on the same page regarding this, so I'm more than happy to help.
Seems so.
Okay. Okay, running real quick to the next slide. Again, very similar to what you saw yesterday. So we are well over our residential water use. That budget is the most significantly over. The outdoor, if you notice, the CII landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters, the second one down there, it's actually exactly the same as the objective. The state is supposed to be releasing more data later this year that will help us actually calculate that to a higher degree of accuracy, but it's likely not to change the situation a whole bunch. Going down water loss, we are trying to get that lower, and we are expecting that our next year reporting, we've already done the report for that, will be lower. Variances, that again is generally just that seasonal population variance that we are expecting to apply for every year. All told, we are at about 8.6 billion gallons, and as of today, with the 2025 standards, the state wants us to be at 5.9 billion gallons. So we are roughly 2.6 billion gallons over. Next slide, if you don't mind.
Quick question.
Oh, yes.
I don't know, you obviously probably can't do this in your head, but how many acre feet is 2.1 billion gallons?
All the water nerds over there pull out their phones.
How many gallons are in an acre foot?
325851, 325,851. Yeah. Did we have someone doing that over there? I cannot. What, oh.
Per acre foot.
One acre foot is 325,000 gallons. 828 gallons. 325,828.
Yeah.
Point.
So
325, what? What'd you say?
What was-
325?
So if we wanted to give the difference, the 2.6 billion gallons, so divide that by the 325,851, you're going to get about 8,000 acre feet. We're just under there, but
Okay.
quite a significant amount of water, and that is the best these standards are ever going to get. So
Do we have a customer that uses 8,000 acre feet a year? I mean, we shouldn't put anybody on blast like that, but I mean, we import, well, yeah, it's a lot of water. How can you possibly reduce that much, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to.
yeah. So I will say, we do not have a single customer that uses 8,000 acre feet of water. We use roughly 30 to 33,000 acre feet of water, depending on the year. That's including our recycled water. Probably our largest customer, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm almost positive, would be the city of Palm Springs. They use roughly 3 to 5% of our total water use. So probably more in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 acre feet for all of their properties.
That includes the golf course? The municipal golf
Yes,
course?
that would include the golf course.
Which is mostly recycled water. Right? So that's not figured into this amount, is it? Recycled?
No, recycled water is counted in these amounts. If we want to go back real quick. So excuse me, it's maybe not very clear on the graph there, on the chart there, but that 1.1 million in the CII outdoor landscapes associated with dedicated irrigation meters, about 900 million gallons of that is our recycled water use. The remainder is potable use going to landscapes that we know are marked for irrigation.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Is the water that the tribe's using at their golf courses in this?
The water
That'd
that,
be, that'd be in the CII, dedicated meter.
yes, as long as the tribe used water in 23, 24, yes, it's,
Yeah.
I don't, any water that they use that was not from their private wells would be included in this calculation.
So they are on private wells.
Yes.
Private wells would not be included then, so
Okay.
I apologize if I wasn't 100% sure on that.
So where would private pumpers figure into these numbers?
Private pumpers aren't part of our domestic system, so they aren't included at all as of right now.
Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. I guess we can go forward.
Yeah, so this is, again, pretty similar to what we saw, but there's a little bit more information on here. So those numbers, based on what was on the previous slide, we would be 31% over. But as I mentioned before, those standards ratchet down 2030, 2035, 2040. We're projecting to be over 40% over by 2040. The number I have right now is 42%, but we are expecting, as I kind of alluded to, a little bit more data that might drive that number to be a little bit different than what's actually in these projections as of right now. I do want to cover quickly the CII performance measures, mostly because they're really not covered a whole lot in this presentation, but for some water agencies, these are quite administratively complex. They're going to take a lot of staff time, and we are not as focused on them because we're very focused on the big reductions needed, but for agencies that have smaller reductions, these are also quite important and quite difficult. We are internally handling these, but not as concerned because of our needs as far as water use reduction. But the CII performance measures require us to do some of this classification. So if you can kind of see the 22 categories on the bottom picture there. So those are the 22 categories that all of our businesses within our service area need to go into. And then there's a lot of reporting, a lot of data gathering that is required by the state. That is that very small chart on the top, but it kind of goes into the timeline of this is also kind of working behind the scenes on the same timeline as everything else happening. So we are working on that as we have fine time and as we are going through and trying to be sure that we are meeting the deadlines there, in addition to running the programs that are going to get our water use down.
So I have a question about that.
Yes.
This is something that's going to have to be regularly maintained as well, whether it's annually or something along those lines. So what data set are you starting with that allows you to even determine what category to put these different commercial entities or users in?
So as part of this, we also have to quantify our top 2.5 and top 20% of our businesses by number of accounts. So that is a large amount of our water usage. So we're actually utilizing a fiscal year data set for the consumption, and there's just listing all of the accounts that were active in that fiscal year and classifying them that way. Thus far, it's been a very manual process to actually classify them. But working through that data set as far as consumption, because that's also a required part of this in order to quantify the consumption and whether or not a business is part of the top 2.5 or top 20%, in addition to the classification. So I'm trying to do everything at the same time. Did that?
Well, so we obviously have commercial accounts. I don't know if we classify them when somebody comes for service and they're a business. I don't know if we tag them differently, commercial versus residential versus whatever, but assuming that we do, so we know what our group of commercial accounts are, but that doesn't necessarily mean we know what they do.
Right. So as of right now, we do only have the residential versus commercial tag. There isn't a whole lot of additional information gathered about what they are doing. And that will require an update when someone's opening an account or changing account information in order to get us to be able to update that. So when there is a new owner coming in, a new person paying for the water bill, that we're making sure to check that as we go along. That process isn't fully concrete at this point, and we're still waiting until 2027 when this full list is required. So there's a little bit of time to work through that process. But if you're asking if that process is set right now, no, not at this time.
Is this something that the Tyler system could support?
We are able to list attributes of the property. So currently, yes, you're correct. We do have commercial versus residential, but that doesn't keep us from including other types of account listings in there.
Okay. Director Grasha?
Some agencies are turning to the idea of creating customer profiles, determining what they should be using versus what they are using. I'm not sure of all the terminology there, but they'll take a look at a particular residence and say, well, this is how much you should be using, and this is how much you are using, and you need. What is that something that is it potentially we're going to have to be faced with, or it seems like draconian efforts are going to have to be made in terms of some people's habits. You know, I just last month the Canadians decided to sell all their spaces at where I live, and they decided to landscape, make it look nicer out front, and they hooked their hose to my faucet. And I happened to have one of those new things at $20 on Amazon, and it was 10,000 gallons of water a month to water one string of plants.
Yeah.
That's a swimming pool, and that they had it set to 30 minutes a day. And I got to thinking, wow, I bet it doesn't take a whole swimming pool of water to keep those plants alive. And then I'm thinking in terms of all of the systems across the system that people really aren't focused on. You know, the gardeners aren't checking those meters, and if they are, they're turning it up, not turning it down, because they don't want the plants to die. So it's an interesting dilemma. You know, it's so easy to hook your hose up to new landscaping and not give it a thought, and you just pay the extra part of the bill. And I think that's essentially what's gone on across the system, and people just aren't focused on it. And
Director Grasha, your comments addressed a few things that we'll be talking about a little bit later.
okay,
We're going to talk about rate structures. I think what you're alluding to might be related to budget-based rates. And then we also have a little bit of discussion about AMI, as well as our future AMI app and dashboard for customers that may address some of the elements that you're referring to.
all the lots sold, by the way. Good news.
Yeah. Yeah, I
All
think
right.
we're going to be doing a little bit more work to focus on our inefficient customers. And some of those features that Director Lort talked about will be how we do that.
And Director McKenna?
Well, you may be going to address it later, but you've introduced the term urban water use objective, which presumably the state has set. Do we know anything about the science behind that, how they arrived at that number for us?
It is quite complicated, and that's part of why I didn't bog down this presentation. So essentially, every component of the objective has an individual calculation. So for example, for say an outdoor objective, they're going to talk about taking your landscape area, multiplying by the reference evapotranspiration, which is a fancy word for how much water evaporates off your plants. They're going to take the effective precipitation, subtract that, multiply by 0.62 to convert it to gallons, and essentially you would kind of end up with this, and then multiply it by what they call a landscape efficiency factor, which is essentially their ratio. That is the part that goes down. So right now we're at 0.8 for residential and commercial. For example, it's going to go down to 0.63 for residential in 2035 and 0.55 in 2040. So multiplying that all together, you get your individual budget. So behind the scenes, we're kind of doing a calculation for each individual one, and we calculate our own budget based on the formula the state provided.
A I'll wait till you get there.
But just for clarification, I believe the factors that you're referring to, one is essentially turf, is it not?
In a way,
Talking-
so it's meant to be more landscape area, so it's not solely turf. It is essentially any landscaping. So it could be your pool, it could be as much as a pool as a landscaping, but could be your pool, could be your desert landscaping, and could be your turf. There are some complications even within what I just explained, but I was trying to I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to bog it down with a bunch of math while I was doing this. If you want to dive into the math, we can do that offline if you'd like. I'm sorry. Did I answer your question, Director Ortega?
Wasn't really a question, but when I think back to Director McKenna's question, for example, when we're talking about the outdoor use, I mean, those calculations, I mean, that data set is driven by the flyovers that have been done by the state to determine what is landscapable area, which may or may not actually be accurate, considering that some areas of desert might show up as landscaped areas but are not really landscaped.
Yeah, and I'll be talking a little bit about our efforts. So it's what the state calls an alternative data process or data request process. So we are going to potentially be pursuing that for things like landscape area, for things like evapotranspiration, because we're not sure that the state is capturing the intricacies of our local area when they're trying to do something for the whole state.
And the reason that we agreed as a board to fund the CMIS project out at Ascena was so that we could more accurately portray what that rate is.
Right, and it's going to get a little bit of a highlight later on in the day.
Okay,
here today.
great. Thank you.
All right, are we ready for the next slide? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Excuse me. My eyes tricked me. So this is just doing a little bit of math to try to give you a decent idea of what the projection is actually going to be. So we have our actual water use, 8.64 billion. That's the exact same number from the chart that we were seeing earlier. And then we have kind of this ratcheting down of the objective. So we are talking about 5.04 billion gallons being the objective. So all told, we're at about 3.6 billion gallons that we want to save. If you multiply that at the time that this was made over the 17-year life, you're looking at about 200 million gallons that we would like to conserve every year to stay on track to meet the objective. That is quite a lot, even in the best of years. So there's still a lot more to do. This sort of makes things seem really scary, and in some ways they are, but we are kind of ignoring that DWA has a savings rate that we are on track to be doing. So we typically save about 2.2% per year when comparing since 2013. If we stay on that track, our 2040 usage ends up being about 5.92 billion, as opposed to the projected urban water use objective of 5.04 billion. Now, obviously, that's not less still. So it might be that we have to continue to keep our programs running to some degree and launch new things. Those are in the works, and I'm going to kind of get into detail on them one by one as we go through further into this presentation. But just to sort of set the stage of, we're expecting that we're going to continue to save, but we may need to do even more than we're doing now. Any questions on this slide? All right, next slide. So this is just to compare some of our other neighboring water agencies. These are all their acronyms. So we're looking at DWA, so we have that 42%. This is based on a publicly available state data set. I don't have all of their individual information, so this is the best information that we have. Some suppliers are counting their recycled water a little bit differently, and we have, based on what I can see, for example, CVWD and Eastern Municipal aren't counting their recycled water the way the state intended based on a meeting we had with them. So They may be a little bit worse than is what is shown on this graph, but still significantly better than us. So if we go through, the ones in order are DWA, obviously, Mission Springs Water District, Myoma Dunes Mutual Water Company, IWA, CVW, Coachella Valley Water District, Coachella Water Authority, Western Municipal Water District, and then Eastern Municipal Water District. So all that to say, we have one of the highest required savings in the state. We are facing a lot of challenges regarding this, and not a lot of people are in the same boat as us. I will say for Mission Springs Water District, they are what gives me a little bit of hope that we may have some data errors that are kind of feeding into our calculation, because they're a very different water district from us, and they have a lot less grass, and there may be a some kind of error that is making our situation and their situation look a little bit worse. So we're both considering that SIMA station that Director Ortega kind of alluded to, and seeing if that might be the source of that error, but we'll have to continue with other options if need be. One thing I want to mention is that we are immediately out of compliance based on our numbers, but because we're likely to qualify for what's called an alternative compliance pathway in the regulation, we will stay in compliance as long as we show that we are continuing to save at about 1% per year compared to a 3% rolling average, and that we have a plan to reach compliance by 2040. Part of what that plan is going to be is what you're seeing today. So it's all kind of feeds into each other, that we are trying to get to compliance, but we are not immediately assessed as out of compliance because of this alternative compliance pathway. The state has also indicated, but not formalized, that they're going to take into account your good faith efforts. So we are trying to be good partners with the state and trying to keep them enterprised of our situation, and hopefully stay on their good side and make sure that they know that we are trying everything we can to reach compliance by 2040. All right. Any questions here? All right. So as part of that, we have put together an implementation plan. It's about 70 pages. I have a little example here, not quite finalized because we're still working on the communications aspect of it. But the implementation plan is essentially a bunch of compliance options that were assessed. So we took about 40 compliance options, 40 things that I could think of that we could do for conservation. And then we sort of combined some of them, worked around things, and we kind of coalesced around 9 key initiatives. So these aren't in order of priority or anything like that. They're actually literally in the order that they were in the plan. So there are some things that we think may be more important and some things less, but just giving an idea of what we think we may need to focus on, enhance, or continue doing in order to actually get to a good path regarding compliance. And then we're going to go over these one by one. But any questions up to now?
Well, I'm sure went over this before, asked this question before, but with all the conversion that we've done, and our numbers are still going up, and it's not development that's forcing that. People are just running their faucets longer. They're not turning it off when they brush their teeth, I guess.
Oh, blame the tourists. Okay.
Yeah, so we do have our savings trend, but yeah, year to year, there's a little bit of variability. So, we're just coming off of a drought, so we've seen a little bit of an increase this year. And some of that we can sort of expect, but yeah, some of it is going to be about making sure that people have even more options to increase their habits and to sort of increase our level of service, so that they're not, that at least we have looked at their controllers and are able to, control those 30-minute watering times or something like that. So I'll get into those in a little bit more detail, but yeah, obviously we're trying to make sure that we're targeting customers that are the most inefficient. And I think the next slide sort of gets at that too. So.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Next slide, if we can. So I did just want to briefly mention automated metering infrastructure. So when I talk about targeting inefficient customers, this is part of how we're going to do it. A lot of the next slides, we talk about getting better data, getting more involved with our customers, doing more. AMI is sort of the tool of how we get there. So the water use data is going to be transmitted much closer to hourly rather than monthly, and we'll be able to better assist our customers with things like high bills and things like leaks. There was a recent news story where they had launched a AMI system, had an app. That alone, they calculated saving about 6% of water, just having more information in the customer's hands. So when we talk about our needs, that system that we are already working on and already planning to have hopefully in place by 2026 is going to be really important to getting there, and hopefully really important to us for targeting our programs better and making sure that we are actually hitting inefficient customers and not just everyone. All right. Yeah, unless there's any questions. Oh, there we go. So I will briefly talk about, well, not briefly maybe, but grass removal has been and continues to be a very popular and important water conservation program. So when I say that, we have averaged about 700,000 square feet removed over the past 3 years. So that is about 48 million gallons each year based on our conservation study that we recently did that calculated we saved 67 gallons per square foot of grass removed. So when we talk about wanting to save 200 million gallons a year, it is just certainly a tool to get there. That said, it can't be the whole tool, and it may not be entirely used that way, because meeting the objective with solely grass removal, so if we said we want to save the full 3.4 billion gallons, you're talking about 51 million square feet, even split over 16 years that we have remaining now. That's still quite a significant investment. So we can't rely solely on just giving money to people to get them on board. And what we may end up doing, when we'll get to this a little bit later when Ernie starts presenting, is that some of that might come as a result of non-functional turf. So we have to get this grass out somehow or another. It is one of the biggest water users in our service area, but whether we do that by incentivizing through the carrot or enforcing through the stick is going to be something that we're going to be discussing a little bit more. I will say that I have the next slide. There's a little graph on it. The data on that's a little bit fuzzy. So we took the usage of all of these properties, took the square footage that we can identify in GIS, but our GIS system's not perfect. So sometimes streets aren't properly taken out. We can't account for master meters, and we can't account for places where a lot of residents are stacked on top of each other. So you'll notice that apartments are a little bit higher on the next slide. And part of it is that they kind of have all of those confounding factors. So if we want to go to the next slide real quick. So, excuse me, this is probably a lot of information. So starting in the white is HOAs. So all of those little points are the gallons per square foot of what they are using. So you can see that we have some that are going all the way up to 160 gallons per square foot, and some that are quite a lot less. So if you see the lowest ones there, those are some of our newest developments like Miralawn or Cody Place. Some of our older communities are doing pretty good, but most of our communities, and you can kind of tell by the average of the red line, are doing not as great. If we wanted them to be at the urban water use objective, so what that is calling for them to be, they'd be at the green line. So that's an average of 22 gallons per square foot, as opposed to the 46 gallons per square foot of our HOAs based on the ones that we looked at. So I did go through for the highest usage. And I will say too, this is not every single HOA, but it's a pretty dang good sample size of what we've actually got out there. So our challenge is at least getting them closer to that yellow line, which is literally just the urban water use objective plus 50%. But this is kind of the challenge, and this kind of feeds into the residential numbers that we saw, where we were about double what our objective is. Again, we're about double what we're trying to be here in these communities too. Purple is the same information, but for mobile home parks. And then blue is the same information, but for apartment communities. And just mentioning again, apartment communities have a lot of those confounding factors that kind of make it hard to fully analyze this. But this might speak to we have similar inefficiencies all across a lot of our residential type of communities. Anyway, I found this interesting, so I thought it was interesting to share that these are communities that are going to be challenged by this and potentially also challenged by something like non-functional turf enforcement. Did we have any questions going up here?
So these multifamily or these HOAs and multifamily communities, where are they counted in terms of the objective?
So as of right now, all of these communities would be counted as residential. The state left it up to water suppliers exactly where to count HOAs, but because in 2040, HOAs dropped to, an 0.55 landscape efficiency factor if they're residential and an 0.45 landscape efficiency factor if they're commercial. I thought because the main purpose of an HOA community is to have people live there and use it, that they would fit better under residential, and it was also beneficial for us come that 2040 deadline.
Okay.
Who is the guy that's 120 square feet?
Well,
So
actually, there's
Why not?
160 up there.
That's
yeah. Yes. I will say that, oh yes.
I'll let you off the hook, but man, those guys, you would think that that they would have gotten the message just by having to write the check.
The wall of shame.
Yeah, so I will say that without naming names, the highest one there, they do have a lot of those confounding factors that I talked about for apartment complexes where they're kind of stacked on top of each other. So they have 3 or 4 stories of that building that they are stacked on top of each other. So there's maybe a lot of indoor use that's feeding their gallons per square foot when we calculate that. That's hard to separate out based on our data. So that's my best guess. But yes, obviously I will say even given that, that community probably has more to do.
I was under the impression that was per square foot of grass, and I just thought, man, they're going
Yeah.
at it. Okay.
All right.
It's easy to do.
Yep, next slide if we can. Excuse me. So what does this actually mean in numbers? So if we wanted to get our HOAs, mobile home parks, and apartments to the green line, they would be talking about removing 10 million square feet for these HOAs, 900,000 for the mobile home parks, and 1.8 million for the apartments. So none of that is easy, although we do have 16 years to make this happen. So we could make a significant headway on some of these if we wanted to keep grass removal going. If we didn't, we would end up having to shift more towards education instead and sort of get the word out there and hopefully get the controllers program better, but it's sometimes easier when you have a carrot. I will also say that single family homes where we would have the incentive, typically they're about $400,000 to $600,000 of our typical grass removal funding. And they certainly have a lot of variability within those customers as well, with a lot of inefficient customers that we could target and hopefully get them on board through means like grass removal programs.
And would you be using AMI to find those residential?
Yeah, the hope would be that some combination of AMI and GIS, we'd be able to actually target our residential customers who are the most inefficient. So rather than having a chart, which is great, but it's a point in time, we could actually manage that in realer time of, hey, who are our customers who are really struggling every July, and send out targeted advertisements to them regarding things like grass removal, things like smart controllers, or even high efficiency nozzles, so that we are better able to target. And when I say inefficient customers, I will say my thought is usually that because I run a water conservation program, I normally get all the people who are interested in water conservation, and I need to generate interest in the people who are not getting the message. And part of that is making them get the message more. So. All right. So next, I'm going to talk about direct device installation. So this also feeds kind of into Director Ortega's previous question regarding inefficient customers. So I will say that this is a program where customers would be hiring the agency would be hiring a contractor to go into customers' homes and help them source and install devices. So this essentially takes all the thought out of getting a smart device, like a controller, like a toilet, like a washing machine, and we will essentially do all that work for them. They would just let us know they're interested. We'd send someone into their home and install those devices for them, make sure things like a controller are actually programmed properly, at least when we leave. And hopefully that helps us save. So we have run a DWA smart controller program with a direct install option in the past, and we were generating about 4 times the interest that we are now, where it's an option where customers go out and buy and then install themselves. So we would hope that we would increase some of that participation. And so we would want to make sure that that contractor can do multiple devices at once. We don't want to get separate contractors doing everything if we can absolutely avoid it. And the other thing about these programs is that we still want to be targeting those inefficient customers. I will say there's a white paper out of, I think, Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, where they found that when they opened it up to everyone, they actually had a lot of customers who increased their water usage because they were watering their landscape at a deficit. But when they tried to target only their most inefficient customers, they ended up really saving a lot of water because those customers had a lot of water left to save. So it's kind of an interesting thing about targeting those customers with better data. Another thing I do want to mention that's not on the slide here is that there are usually partners who are able to help you with this kind of thing. The most prominent one so far seem to be SoCal Gas. They have a very similar program where they replace a lot of their gas fixtures. And if we can get their interest, we may be able to partner with them and have their contractor help us to also do water efficient devices while they're in someone's home already. So that would be something that we may end up exploring. This program may wait until we have an AMI implementation. So right now, I'm not rushing out to go do this, but it's certainly something that we want to see get some ground under it in the next few years.
So when you're talking about, if you're talking about direct device, and you mentioned the smart controller, and I was actually in that pilot program way back. And it was great because I didn't have to think about it. Someone showed up, installed it, programmed it, and left. And it was very easy. My recollection at the time, and this may or may not still be true, is that Coachella Valley Water District does something very similar to that, and still does something very similar to that. So have we been in contact with them about what that might look like, how we might take advantage of what they're doing, partner with them, talk to the people that they're using?
So Coachella, I don't know if you wanted to say something, but Coachella Valley Water District uses their own staff for that program. So it makes it more difficult to compare exactly what we would end up doing.
Okay.
But I don't know if you have anyone else had something to add.
850 staff.
Is
So it's easy for him.
how do you, that's out doing the work outside, so if it springs a leak, it's just leak. But on the inside, when you're talking about putting in toilets, and this creates, to me, a liability for the agency that
So-
might be, more troublesome than the savings.
So this is definitely Director Grasha and board members still in the exploratory phase. And then I will say there, like Mission Springs, they had a direct install toilet program, if I'm not mistaken. And so as we're doing our homework, we'll obviously be reaching out to all the different agencies and seeing how they've done it. Yes, CVWD uses their own staff. Did Mission Springs use their own staff? I would not think so.
Right.
So those are all different pieces that we would be reviewing, and of course involving our legal team as well to make sure anything that we do with outside contractors is buttoned up.
Right, and I've heard about the SoCal Gas program quite a few times at various conferences, and I mean, it's not like this is a new thing anymore. So obviously there's a track record.
I had them come to my house, actually, and they did install some shower heads that turned off once the hot water had arrived. So you had to turn it back on again, and that was helpful. It seems to me we need to have something similar to that, but for water use. We need a water use audit, a program that we send someone, looks at the sprinkler controller, looks at the toilets, looks at their faucets, and writes up a recommendation. They can get, we can give them aerators and flow reducers for toilets and showers. Sorry, for faucets and showers, right there on the spot. Toilet replacement is huge. I know when Los Angeles did this, they sent a plumber with the toilet, But they also had enforcement. Now, we don't have any police power at all, that I can tell. Maybe Mr. Red.
We actually do.
Do we? I read the whole.
I'm hoping we're going to get to that.
Well, yeah, let's get to that. But when you sell a property in Los Angeles today, you are required to replace all the toilets with ultra-low flow, 1.28. And I recently had experience of this, I had low-flow toilets in the property, 7 of them actually, all of 1.4 gallons. I thought I was the saint. But I was a sinner when it came to selling the property. And, $700, $800 later, I was a saint again. But if we don't have that kind of enforcement, and also they have systematic code enforcement for rental properties, they will go in there, and if there's a flow restrictor missing from that shower head, it will have to be replaced. Same with faucets. They do this on an ongoing sort of structural basis. It's built into the system. I think we have to get there too. We'll have to have programs. I have to have the city help us, both cities, Cathedral City and Palm Springs. We'll have to do, part of their code enforcement will be, imposing these requirements. And yeah, they're going to have to be requirements, not options. I don't know how we enforce that. Maybe later we'll find out. But there's a lot of changes in how we do things. It's going to be big.
Yeah. So some of the ones that you talked about didn't make the top, although I'm sure the implementation plan will eventually be available if you'd like to review it in full. I will say that we are partnering with the city of Palm Springs wherever we can and trying to get them on board with this, and especially their sustainability and planning have been where we've really had a lot of success there. But yeah, I agree with you that getting them on board with some of these initiatives is really important. Excuse me. Next slide, if we can. So I'm going to give this at a really high level, and then I think that we may end up diving a little bit more into detail. But so compliance option 3 is regarding rate structures. So we are in the midst of preliminary stages of a new cost of service study. So we are trying to accurately reflect DWA's cost of service and keep in mind these challenges when we are setting rates. That said, rates are under judicial scrutiny. I said increasing. I don't know if that's quite true. I'm sure they've always been under judicial scrutiny. But at least recently, Otay Water District had a court decision where their rates were found illegal. And that was because they were found to be trying to incentivize conservation and not reflect their actual cost of service. So I don't know if, Esther, if you wanted to add anything or go into more detail.
Well, as Clark had indicated, we are in just the preliminary stages of just investigating the possibilities. What can we do with a rate structure to help us in our conservation efforts? DWA, as you're aware, we have a flat rate. So for every unit of water you use, it's the same cost, whether it was your first unit or whether it was your 100th, as well as we have our fixed charge per month. We do have some options on the table that we're going to be exploring further, but basically we do have to proceed with a lot of caution because of the court cases that have come out that have essentially invalidated some of the rate structures that are out there, such as budget-based rates and different types of tiers. Basically, everything that we charge for, it just has to be substantiated by the cost of service. So it's not based off of the size of your property, it's based off of how much you actually use. How much did it cost to actually provide you that gallon of water? So that's what we're looking at. And again, we are in the preliminary stages of what we can do that we'll bring back to the board at a future time with more detail of what our possibilities are to gauge the board's interest and appetite for going down that road, because we do have some options, but of course we want to fully flesh those out, have legal opinion on them so that we can provide you the best information in which to make a decision of whether we should actually go down the route of having a full rate study prepared with those new types of rates. So more to come on that.
All right. With that, I think we can go to the next slide, and I will be handing it off to Ernie Valenciano, our Senior Conservation Specialist. He has taken the lead on this project, and he's going to explain it to you. And hopefully, if you have any questions, this will be coming up at your July meeting, your first meeting in July. So this is your soonest thing that we're going to need feedback on. So I would welcome questions about this.
I have a question before we move on. So the cost of our conservation efforts across the board, is that part of the cost of service or not?
Yes, it is part of the cost of service. So
Okay.
that is one of the mechanisms of which we can
And
have.
I hope I don't want to offend it, but if the water pigs that, are causing the most havoc, we're not allowed to charge them the most money?
There are some mechanisms, like I said, that we do have the ability to affect that to some extent, but we cannot just create an excessive punitive tier in order to incentivize that conservation. It has to be tied to the
recoup
cost of service.
of conservation to make up for their overuse. We're not allowed to do that?
No, we are allowed to place a conservation cost on a higher tier if that's what we
Okay.
choose to do, because that is, we need to conserve, so therefore there's the potential for having that be a cost to substantiate a higher tier. But we do have some other potential mechanisms that we'll be presenting.
All right. Thank you for that answer. It's very clarifying.
President Ortega, members of the board, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your time and your ears and your feedback. I'm going to be talking about one of the compliance options that we are looking at, which is related to AB 1572, and it is an ordinance for non-functional turf. And so we've developed this journey that you can see up on the screen, and we're going to take you on the journey so that we can hopefully explain to you what we need and why we are working on this ordinance so that we can get from start to finish. But before we go on this journey, we want to do a little bit of a warm up and get a stretch so that we have an understanding of the framework that we're working with before we get to actually having an ordinance. And so in October 13th, 2023, Governor Newsom did pass AB 1572, which, as many of you know, is a restriction or a prohibition on the irrigation of non-functional turf areas with potable water. And so when I meet with HOAs or commercial properties on water walkthroughs, which are audits, I explain to them that potable water is drinking water. When you go into your house or into an office and you turn on that faucet, fill up a glass of water, you can drink it. That's the same water that we're using to irrigate some of these non-functional turf areas that are not being used. So the state has seen that type of water use, potable water for non-functional turf areas, as being wasteful. Now, who would this affect and who would be exempt? Well, the exempt properties for AB 1572 exempt customers would be single-family homes or any turf areas that are being irrigated with recycled water. Recycled water not being potable water. They would not need to comply with this legislation or DWA's ordinance. AB 1572 also requires that a local agency or governing body establish an ordinance to enforce the prohibition of this NFT irrigation. And so there are compliance deadlines, which I hope you can see them there towards the bottom of the presentation slide here. And it slowly starts to roll out. And so we'll notice that January 1st, 2027 is going to be the compliance date for government or public agency properties, Desert Water Agency being one of those examples. By that time, by that date, we will no longer, anyone affected by it will no longer be able to irrigate their NFT, non-functional turf areas, with potable water. It then goes to 2028, which is commercial, industrial, and institutional properties. It jumps to 2029, which affects HOAs, common interest developments, condos, retirement, mobile home parks, excuse me. And then the last one would be January 1st, 2031, and that would be for government public agencies that fall within a disadvantaged community part of the service area. Okay. Any questions on this before we move ahead?
So for these commercial, industrial and institutional properties, these are the same that we're also labeling when Clark was speaking earlier about how we're identifying these commercial accounts and categorizing them in some way based on the type of business that they are. That's the same data set?
Yeah, it would be the same customers. The way they put it together here is it's commercial, industrial, institutional. When Clark has to break that out into subcategories, he has to add extra details. For us, we just look at it from a commercial, industrial, institutional, which would be the same.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, we're almost done stretching. We're still not started. As you can tell, we're not on step 1 yet, but again, just a little warm up. So what I want to talk about is what our Desert Water Agency ordinance would look like in terms of just the general structure, and we'll break out into details shortly. But essentially, it's going to be a list of definitions so that customers that need to comply with the ordinance itself understand what the definitions are for things like commercial property, functional versus non-functional turf areas. They will also be required to submit a self-certification. This is going to be extremely important because it will be the basis for how we move forward and enforce any violations to this ordinance. And the self-certifications, we'll explain in detail what it entails, but they will be mandatory. Deadlines, there are 2 sets of deadlines we want to keep in mind. One will be the deadline to self-certify, and that would be to get Desert Water Agency the information it needs to review and understand the property where its functional versus non-functional turf areas are. And then there will be the compliance deadline with AB 1572 or our ordinance, and that would be the timeline that we saw on the previous page. It's broken out by year, depending on the customer and the sector they fall under. So that is going to be crucial for us. Enforcement will rely on those self-certifications. Okay, and then technical assistance, we want to make sure that for our customers, we provide as much help as we can. We do perform water walkthroughs, which are audits. They're very, very specific to that customer. We don't like to approach these meetings with a one-size-fits-all type of presentation. We actually bring data that guides customers on how to conserve water. It shows them how they've engaged with their water over the past 5 years. So I would say it's very successful, but we'll offer other things too, like workshops, tours, informational resources on our website, and things of that nature.
So just have a question. If we go back to the previous slide with regards to the compliance deadlines,
Sure.
We have one for, the first one that we're going to hit in 2027 is for local governments. But then we have another one for local agencies, state and local government agencies that are in disadvantaged communities. So does that mean if we are given the alternative compliance for making California conservation a California way of life, does that also give these local institutions, local government institutions, such as the city of Palm Springs, a different, the 2031 compliance deadline versus the 2027?
As far as I'm concerned, there's no overlap in terms of the, so like if we did qualify for, and Clark can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we did qualify for an alternate compliance pathway for the urban water use objective, it wouldn't adjust or modify the compliance deadline as it pertains to AB 1572.
Yeah, and what I would add to that as well is the alternative compliance pathway is for DWA's service area. And so these property types and like City of Palm Springs, right, that would be specific to City of Palm Springs. So I don't know what their DAC status is, but the compliance pathway and the property types are 2 separate, as Ernie mentioned, 2 separate categories, so to say.
Yeah, excuse me, I may just add we've tried to engage our local government properties to make their own determination. So we have made a determination for Desert Water Agency where we would qualify for disadvantaged, although we don't have NFT at this stage. But we are trying to make sure that the government properties are aware that they may have two different compliance paths depending if they're a disadvantaged community or not.
Any other questions?
Yeah, on the ordinance that you're talking about here, what does it take for this? Does it, well, this ordinance will affect everyone, but when you're talking about certification, is every ratepayer going to be put on the hook to certify or self-certify?
Great question.
Regardless of whether it's, or is it commercial or is it residential?
It would be any of the customers that fall within the compliance categories that are on that first slide. So if it's a government property, if it's commercial,
Oh,
if
okay.
it's a HOA,
Not residential.
not single-family home,
Okay,
they will not be affected by this
okay. I just,
legislation
thank
or
you.
ordinance.
That seemed like a
Sure.
problem. All right.
Thanks for clarifying.
I think, did you? Yeah.
Hypothetical, really. It goes to enforcement. When we get an application for service from a new customer, is it hypothetically possible for us to say to that customer, you need a water audit? You have to, say within 60 days, install the low-flow toilet, install the sprinkler controller, and maybe within 180 days, remove non-functional turf. I mean, do we have the authority, the ability to dictate to a new customer, you must do these things? Because that I think would bring it in a whole lot faster than 2030, 2031. We could start that 6 months from now. Question? Anyone answer?
I think that's a good question. If I may, I'll ask an adjacent question. If it is something that we could do, how manageable would it be? Currently, we have a staff of 2 for conservation.
Those things are usually part of the building code and enforced by the city.
They are currently, but I mean, what if they don't? You know, we can't make the city pass an ordinance. Los Angeles.
We
its
would
water
have to,
department-
we would have to gently encourage the city to add that into the building code
I would do
and
that.
then, and then enforce it.
I would do that without the gently, but I know. I'm wondering if we can take something more direct. I understand there's only 2. What Los Angeles does is they say you have to have a licensed contractor sign this off, which means somebody who's got some responsibility to the public. I was a licensed contractor. I could sign myself off. I didn't dare do that. But somebody, we could delegate that authority to home inspectors, for instance, licensed contractors, plumbers, people who
That's
have.
through the city of LA, right?
The city of LA runs the water and the building department.
So that's a
you know,
different.
they can
I'm
do,
sure it's part of their building code.
it's a building code issue when you're building something, but I'm trying to find a way to get it to happen faster. You know, if we wait till until people go in for a building permit before we say, oh, you know, you got to change all your toilets, it will never happen. You know, I was in San Diego not long ago, and the hotel toilets were flushing 5 gallons every time because they'd never updated. You know, if you can impose on renovation, so on, but we've got to go further than that and faster than that. We have to have every single homeowner get on board if they're going to meet these targets.
Yep. And I don't think that's a bad idea. One slide we're going to cover later in the presentation is considering our options, all of them, and then seeing how feasible, how cost-effective they are, and ensuring that as Desert Water Agency, we make the best use of our resources, our staff, and our time, and our funding.
But on that point, when we sign up a new customer, somebody goes out and reads the meter. You know, now they can't get inside the house when they're doing that, but they are there. Maybe we just have to expand that activity to include, you know, looking at the sprinkler controller, looking at what else. You know, we may have to institute a program by which, to get service turned on, you have to let one of our people into your house to look at the, you know, what sort of water usage you're up against. Just a thought. It's a question, really, not a thought. Can we do that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that actually might be a legal question on what DWA law allows and does not allow. I
Well,
don't
we
know,
do have
Mr.
general counsel with us.
Mr. Riddell, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Well, I have some thoughts. I think it's going to be really important to coordinate with the city, make sure you're both on the same page. It's true that Desert Water Agency does not have, cannot adopt or enforce a building code. So you cannot specify, what goes into the house. Your authority really stops, with your facility. But what you could do, and it's pretty coercive, is to say, this is a condition of service. And so if you don't satisfy these requirements, then you don't get service. So that's another way of accomplishing the same thing. That's pretty heavy-handed, the better way to do it is to coordinate with the city to make sure that your objective is achieved in their building code.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're on to the next slide, which is going to talk about, now we're on the journey, right? So we've hit phase one, and we're, what as Desert Water Agency we want to do is make sure that we dedicate enough time to target customers or water customers that will be affected by this ordinance. And so we've already started that. We've sent out emails and letters over the past year and a half that focus on commercial properties and HOAs in order to encourage them to get in touch with us, schedule a water walkthrough, at which point we go out there and we meet with them. We talk legislation, we discuss what this could potentially mean for their property. And again, we bring all sorts of really useful information like their water use data, plotted out on a graph. And so we'll continue to do that, and we'll definitely ramp that up as the AB 1572 ordinance deadlines start to approach. We want to make sure that we have at least a year of solid targeted communication to these customers so that we give them enough runway to plan and comply with the ordinance itself. Technical assistance, that's going to be workshops, FAQs, information on our websites, water walkthroughs, as we mentioned before. From my experience here at Desert Water Agency, I can confidently say that we have probably some of the most invested community members I've ever worked with, and it's a pleasure because it makes my job easier. Oftentimes when we go perform water walkthroughs, you can tell that they care. It's not always about the dollar for them. Of course, you have to measure that and you have to account for it, but people want to conserve water. And so we'll continue to offer those resources. We've been a part of CV Water Counts, which is also a great place to educate not only ourselves, but educate our customers across the valley. And we work with regional partners like Coachella Valley Water District and other neighbors here to make sure that we spread this message, especially as regulations and ordinances are rolling out. It's really important also that we build customer confidence. One of the major points of feedback that I've heard from our water walkthroughs with commercial or HOA properties is we need more tangible direction. We can go out there and give them all sorts of pointers and leave them feeling with a good feeling, but in terms of having something that you can take initiative on, what I'm getting at is if they're able to identify grass areas that they could remove, they are wanting to wait to remove it until they have an ordinance to refer to. That way they're not removing areas they may not need to remove, wasting resources, money that could be put replacing areas or removing grass areas that would be deemed non-functional. So this is mainly focused on our engagement with our community and our customers as it pertains to the ordinance. Any questions? Okay. Now we're going to talk about self-certifications. So before we can do any sort of enforcement and before the ordinance date, the compliance date rolls around, we want to make sure that we receive what's called a self-certification. Any water customer that would be affected by this ordinance would need to submit to Desert Water Agency a self-certification that provides a map of their area, that they identify their functional areas so that we can review that, photos or any other proof that could justify or make a strong case for those turf areas having function in the past, present, and/or future. So that's going to be very important for us. We want to make sure that these self-certifications are submitted to Desert Water Agency by 6 months before their compliance date. So if you look at the bottom of this slide, you'll see a timeline that I created. And keep in mind, this timeline is going to be specific to those categories we spoke of at the very beginning. So whether you're a government agency, HOA, you're going to have a different year. But the point would be, you should get your self-certification to us as soon as possible, really. But if you get to July 1st, before your compliance date, you could face potential fines. And so the reason we have that in place is because we can't enforce, we can't regulate, review this regulation going forward if we have nothing to refer it to, something to look at, to compare. So that's going to play a big role in customers knowing how to comply. So as I mentioned, they'll submit their plans and any other evidence. And if they do reach that point where can we go to the next slide? It's going to give us a bigger view of the timeline. So that bracket that goes across the timeline highlights the targeted communication that we as Desert Water Agency want to devote to our customers, to get them educated. If they get to July 1 and they are just submitting their self-certification, that would be a $125 fine for that month. August would be $250 penalty, September $500, and it would continue on until they've self-certified. And I want to also point out that this has the potential to continue on until we reach that, until we receive their self-certification. And this could set up, go ahead, sorry.
So it's not uncommon for an HOA, for example, to have more than one water meter. Are we treating each water meter as a customer, or are we treating that HOA as a customer?
Well,
And I would say the same thing for the city of Palm Springs, for example. They have many meters through properties throughout the city. And so how I mean, a penalty of $125 for the city of Palm Springs is not much, or a large HOA, which might have 8 meters, for example. So how would we look at them?
We typically have a good report as to which meters are associated with which customer. So it would be a fine on one of those accounts. So to answer that question, and to clarify, this would be a penalty for not self-certifying. There will be a separate penalty schedule.
Yeah.
That would maybe encourage people more to comply. But as far as for the self-certification, $500 would be the max per month until.
Right. So regardless of the number of meters they might have that would be supporting turf, for example, the penalty would just be 1.
My understanding, or the way we intended it was a penalty per water customer. It would also be very difficult to track which meter is irrigating which non-functional turf area. It adds a layer of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it would be per customer, not per
And then
meter.
they're turning in one certification. They're not turning in a certification per meter.
Correct. It would
One
be
self-certification.
one
for all
self-certification for the
properties.
property. Correct. Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions on this point?
Well, yeah, I just briefly, so we're going to be grinding on some folks. How many at one time do you think? I mean, this is going to be everybody that you identify. And do you know how many that is? Is there 500?
Well, it's more than 500 water customers that would need to comply with the ordinance. So it's going to be there's going to be a big effort on Desert Water Agency's part to make sure that we communicate ahead of time. so that there really is no excuse for a customer not to know.
To certify, right.
Right. And one thing I want to highlight is we took a lot of care in working on this ordinance because we understand that there's a lot of responsibility that goes along with it. And at the same time, to go back to what Clark was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, if we look at our water use objective, urban water use objective, and the metrics we have to hit, I think when we looked at indoor, outdoor residential water use, we're 3.8 billion gallons above where we need to be. You mentioned.
So, well, yeah, I'm thinking, okay, so in a condo association, only one guy's going to know about this probably, though. I mean, it may come up in a meeting, but I don't expect that every resident in that development would be familiar with the grind that you're going to get ready to put on these managers until they force the residents to start ponying up to do conversion. Am I about right on that, do you think?
Well, it's happening right now. I mean, I get calls all the time from HOAs in Palm Springs who want me to come out and talk to them. I mean, not as a member of Desert Water Agency, but as a landscape consultant. They're very aware of it, and a lot of them have met with you. And by the way, I've been very complimentary. But you know, I walk into a room and there might be 8 or 10 people from that HOA who are there for that specific reason to talk about what they can do, what I can help them do in terms of converting to a non-turf landscape. So it's a big deal. They know about it.
Thank you.
Of course, and I'll give a lot of credit to our conservation manager, Clark Elliott, because he did see this coming years ago, and we have been communicating with customers for 3 years since I've been here. And again, we meet with HOA communities. Not all of them will know about the AB 1572 ordinance, but we're going to continue to keep educating them. Our public affairs department also goes to meetings like the Palm Springs Hospitality Association, 1PS. And so we're very active, and so is the community. So I think we have a good collaborative effort going. Okie dokie. I think the next slide. So review and processing, once we do receive these self-certifications, Desert Water Agency will review the information, maps, photos, or any justifications of turf areas for accuracy, and will come to a determination, either approve or deny. As I mentioned before, the approval and receiving of these self-certifications will play a major role in us being able to track and enforce and help our customers conserve water and comply with the ordinance itself. If there ever comes a point where a decision is made by agency staff that a water customer is not happy with, they can go through the normal dispute and appeal process. And we'll cover that in the next slide. Do we have any questions on this one? Okay. So the next slide is the dispute process. So if a determination is made on a customer's self-certification map, let's say they identify the area as functional, but we don't see that justification, and we decide to deny it, they can dispute staff's decision. If staff reviews that dispute and then denies it, they would still have the option within 10 days of that dispute decision, they would have the option to go to Desert Water Agency Board to appeal. So again, typical process. There's also going to be what is called economic hardship postponement. This is a part of AB 1572's text that would allow Desert Water Agency's Board of Directors to make judgment on any customers that have made a good faith effort, have been in touch with us, have shown that they've applied for incentives, have reduced water, done a water walkthrough, all sorts of other variables, but can also prove that they have an economic hardship that makes it more difficult for them to convert or jump on these grass conversion efforts. The board can decide to postpone their compliance deadline by up to 3 years. So that would be something that would eventually come to the Desert Water Agency Board.
So that is in AB 1572.
Mhm.
Okay.
It doesn't say Desert Water Agency Board.
No, right. So this appeal, you said the appeal ultimately could come to the board within 10 days. Does that mean that could they make the appeal within 10 days of the denial, or they actually have to be in front of the board within 10 days?
You're referring to the appeal to maybe
The
making
the certifications.
So from my understanding, it needs to be made within 10 days of the dispute decision. Not they don't need to be in front of the board.
They need to make the appeal within 10
Yes.
days.
Right.
And then we would table it, or we would put it on a future agenda.
Correct.
Not that they ought to be in this room within 10 days.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions on this slide? We're almost there. At the finish line, of course, the objective is to get our water customers to a point where they can cross the finish line and get started on being compliant. In order to do that, though, self-certification is going to play a big role, us engaging and collaborating with customers to make sure that they understand what they need to do and move forward and not have to worry about any penalties or converting areas that they may not be actually deemed non-functional. For violations, so this would be a penalty schedule for violating the ordinance, meaning that if you are found to be irrigating non-functional turf areas after your compliance date, there could be a penalty structure, and I'll explain it this way. So if compliance date has arrived and someone, either the public, reports you, we investigate as a Desert Water Agency and confirm that a non-functional turf area is being irrigated, we would send you a first violation courtesy notice. I hope at that point we could do email, phone call, letter, or what have you, and let the customer know that a violation was reported. This is your first penalty, and you have 30 days to address it or correct it. The reason we did 30 days, initially we were thinking, well, you should just be able to shut the water off, right? Like, it doesn't take 30 days. But again, after doing water walkthrough after water walkthrough, I realized that it's more complex than that, because we want to make sure that we account for any money funding required to make this change, because oftentimes there are valves that are connected to different parts of the system. So 30 days we feel justifies enough time for them to split a valve, add a valve, remove a valve, or any other scenarios that could take place. These are not a per month penalty, by the way. This would be, so like, for example, if a second violation comes along, it's verified, that would be a penalty of $125. If 15 days later someone walks by or Desert Water Agency staff notices the same issue, the third violation would take effect. It would be $250. A fourth would go up to $500. The fifth would be $1,000, and the sixth would be $2,000. That would be the max that a penalty could reach. However, it can occur again and again if it continues to be violated. So a 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th violation could each be $2,000. This would be within a 12-month period. So that is the penalty structure for not complying with the ordinance. There would also be a dispute and appeal process similar to what we just discussed for the self-certification. They want to dispute the penalty, they can do that to agency staff. And if they would like to appeal agency staff's decision, they could go to the board as well.
Go ahead.
Let's describe functional turf versus non-functional turf. It's used on a holiday weekend. Guy takes his family out. They come down, rent a condo for whatever, and they're playing out in the yard, baseball, and they do it 4 times a year. The rest of the year, guy just walks his dog from the other unit over here and walks, and it's not really used that often, other than as a walkway for a dog
Mhm.
or many people walking to the pool. Is that functional turf?
So we get these questions quite often when we do water walkthroughs, and it's difficult, right? Because we also want to take into account the community members that actually live in the HOA or people that actually go to a business that may be affected by the ordinance. And that self-certification allows them the opportunity to justify. If it is functional, we want to see that. Typically, what we would want to see in a functional grass turf area would be that it's regularly used 4 times a year. I would question it, especially, considering if it's a big turf area or a small one, but that it provides a benefit to either the community or public. If it's a park, clearly dedicated a park. If it's a children's playground, there are slides, things of that nature. We want to see that it has a dedicated recreational or community use regularly.
Dedicated.
Yeah. And it's a case-by-case scenario. It's never going to be just as simple as defining it once and it fitting everyone. So
So I have a question for our finance director with regard to these fines. These fines are not, this is non-rate revenue, basically.
You are correct. This is non-rate revenue, so it would not be subject to the same restrictions. So it would be something we could use for conservation or
Right.
other purposes.
Could be
But we
used
could
for that,
dedicate it
or- yeah.
for use however we see fit.
Okay.
there are no other questions.
Not right now.
Okay.
So this is, you're proposing to, you're going to be bringing to this board in July. it sounds
July
like.
first board
First meeting of July,
of
an
July.
ordinance.
Mhm.
And are you anticipate this ordinance becoming effective immediately?
Our goal would be that it is effective as soon as it is reviewed and if approved by the board, simply because we want to use as much time as possible to start really helping our customers start their journey towards compliance.
Okay.
And I would say, even though when and if approved, it would go into effect immediately, obviously, it's not until like those NFT deadlines are met, right? So it's 2027, 2028. So that it really just gives us as staff as much time to be prepared. But then as Ernie and Clark are doing the water walkthroughs, it really helps us to point to, yes, this is our ordinance. This is what we have defined as non-functional. This is what is expected of you in 18 months. So it's a helpful piece that would go into effect immediately if approved.
Who's going to decide final decision on what functional and non-functional is? I mean, in the scenario that I just made up out of you said maybe. How do we nail that down so that it's everybody gets the same opportunity to make the argument that, yeah, I only use the condo 4 times a year and I use the grass out front to play croquet with my kid every time that guy has an argument that it's functional turf, whether he uses it every day or just when is that part of the problem we're faced with? Because it seems like that might be. A lot of condos are empty, just that,
Yeah.
they just sit there. People don't think about it. Bill comes, they just pay it.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. Good luck.
I would say that's why that self-certification piece is super critical. In terms of what you're saying, Director Grasha, making sure that it's consistent applied between each homeowner. I mean, I think it would be our intent as staff to be as consistent as possible with how we've defined it within the ordinance, and then trying to apply the ordinance as best as possible. And that's why we wanted to make sure that there was this appeal and dispute process, because if they disagree, we want to know why. And then if they still feel we haven't done it appropriately, they can come to the board, and then it's at the board's pleasure. So there are mechanisms in place for individuals, not individuals, these property types to make a case for why they think something is functional or non-functional.
So,
And I just want to clarify, this is not for single-family
Right,
homes.
right.
So it wouldn't, yeah.
so he used the word dedicated.
Mhm.
So dedicated sounds to me like, well, it's got to be a baseball field, but that's not really what you mean. It's got to, you know, if it's a grass area out in front, it's dedicated to the community to use as, you know, it's common area, I guess. But it doesn't have to be a grass tennis court. Can just sit there until, you know, people use it as they use it, which is regular use for recreational
Keep off
purpose.
the grass sign, it's non-functional.
Well, I mean, because those are gonna be coming to us, I would think.
Oh, sure.
I've no doubt about that.
And I'm like, do we really want that? And can we create a sustainability board so that they can vote on this stuff? Because I don't know if I want to go through that every time. I can just feel 100 of them lined up.
Well, and I think to your point, Director Grasha, what you said, regularly used, and perhaps we used dedicated incorrectly, but what we want to see is regular use, right? We don't want to see like, oh, it's used twice a year. That's not regular. That doesn't really merit.
It's regular for them, though.
Well, and I think at that point, we would need a further understanding. Is anything else happening between these two events? Is it regularly used for something else outside of these two HOA staple community events? And those are different elements that the staff would have that conversation with the communities and ascertain.
Okay. We're going to be in it.
It's not going to be easy. All right. So should we go to the next compliance
Believe so.
option?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, thank you, Ernie. So I think that partially what Ernie was talking about. So as we see it, that is kind of a partnership program with grass removal as it is right now. And we are trying to get promoting people to use grass removal before those kind of enforcement is in place, and trying to get people aware of things beforehand. Going on to the next compliance option, so compliance option 5, that is our CIMIS station. So that is a California Irrigation Management Information System station. It is, and I've described it this way several times, essentially a fancy weather station. You can see one in there in a grass field on the left. This is potentially really important. So we are trying to gather our local reference evapotranspiration and effective precipitation. You'll remember when I kind of laid out for Director McKenna that those are really important for calculating those residential outdoor use and the CI landscapes with dedicated irrigation meter budgets. They are what we multiply by to try to figure out what our landscapes are demanding out here at the desert. They are designed to work on grass fields. So we are currently fairly far along on an Asina Golf Club partnership and putting it there with the approval of the Department of Water Resources. At this point, I think we are pretty dang close to having it go to the Department of Water Resources Land Use Planning. And that is pretty much the last step before it gets dispersed for signatures. What it will actually do is once we have that local reference evapotranspiration and effective precipitation, we will be able to utilize those in lieu of the state-provided data. The state-provided data is currently using what they call spatial CIMIS. So it is using satellite data with a 1 kilometer resolution to kind of guesstimate what our actual variables are there. But it's also averaging from some of the local CIMIS stations on the map at the bottom right there. I have where the local weather stations are. So we do have the ones in India, which are probably most reflective of us. We have the one up in 29 Palms, which is obviously high desert, Big Bear Lake, which is very different than us, and Hemet, which is on the opposite side of the mountains. So these are not exactly super, super close to us. And when you're talking about spatially averaging some of it, there's potential for some of this data to be a little bit off compared to our local conditions. if we can save even a small increase, it's pretty substantial to the overall budget and an extremely cost-effective way to increase the budget there. So I will say, I'm very hopeful that if we can get a decent increase there, that we see a lot of cost savings and potentially decrease the amount we actually need to save. Any questions regarding SIMIS?
And you mentioned Mission Springs Water District, so, but they're not partnering with us on this, they're doing their own?
The last I heard, Mission Springs Water District is pursuing a SIMIS station at Mission Lakes Country Club. So yes, they're doing their own SIMIS station. We did briefly talk with them about potentially partnering, but it didn't end up working out in detail. But yes, last I heard that they're still pursuing a SIMIS station of their own at Mission Lakes Country Club.
But this data is going to be available publicly, right? So ours will be available, theirs will be available, just like these other stations are currently available through Department of Water Resources.
That's correct. So yeah, on the SIMIS website, you could pull the data for all of these stations.
Okay, thanks.
President Ortega, would you entertain the idea of a 5 to 10 minute break?
Sure.
Okay. What time would you like us to come back?
Can we be back here in 5 minutes?
Yep, so at 2:40? Sounds good, thank you.
Recording.
All right, so I think that we are going to move on to compliance option 6. So this is a little bit wordy, but I'm calling it well production meter calibration and other water loss control measures. Probably could have called it just water loss control measures, but well production meter calibration is the most recent one we did that I'm hopeful is going to help us essentially bring the production of our wells closer to our consumption at our meters. And that has to do with decreasing our real water loss, which, to simplify, is essentially just the water that we lose through our pipes in our system. I think that this one is really important. So while it's the smallest component of the budget, it is the one that we as DWA have total control over. Our customers can't do anything to help us really with real water loss except report leaks when they see them. But it is really up to us to pre-prioritizing projects where we can that are going to get us better production data, bring that production closer to our consumption, and to be replacing our mains and maintaining our equipment wherever we can so that we just lose less water over the course of our system. There is a degree of variability in water loss every year. So this last year, we were close to 650 million. The next year, we're going to be close to 350 million. Now, we want to decrease that variability, but depending on what the year is, what breaks, you can't always count on it being as low as you would like, but hopefully we can get it so that that creates more space within our budget so that we are able to use for things like our residential customers. So even if they remain a little bit over budget, we can still use that space of the extra 300 or so million gallons and give our customers a little bit of breathing room by using our own efficient operations. I don't know if anyone has a question regarding water loss control.
How many gallons we lose in water loss?
So we had in our, excuse me, I'm trying to think, it was a calendar year. Yeah, calendar year 23 report was 670 million. The calendar year 24 report that we're going to be utilizing on this upcoming report is closer to 350 million.
So
So
a mental picture, our reservoirs are not all 1 million gallons, but I'm going to just say that's a reservoir busting open every few hours, right? Every 365. If one broke open every day, how do you lose that much water? Is it seepage or is it actual leaks that we go out and fix? Or are they out there seeping and we just haven't bothered to fix it because it's too hard?
yeah.
Okay.
Or expensive. Or expensive.
Part of it is the breaks that you see. Part of it is the breaks you don't see and that take a while to surface. But in simplifying, as the pipes breaking, I've probably kind of erased some of the other things that we consider real water loss. but things like customer metering inaccuracies. So we do see on the customer meters that they just tend to they tend to be more precise than our well production meters because there's so many more of them, but that creates an inaccuracy within the system. There's also billing inaccuracies. So our major one is that we are accounting for a calendar year report, but in that calendar year report, when you end in December, we're counting portions of our production that were actually, say, in the year 2022. But when you ended, what I want to say. So if you say you end a billing period on December 15th, 2023, or something like that, you're actually accounting for some of that 2022 usage. So there's a little bit of inconsistency in what we're considering from our well production, which is based on the full calendar year to the maximum extent we can, versus what we see on our customer meters. And that can add up to a fairly significant difference. But yeah, so I would say those customer metering inaccuracies and sort of the billing challenges that we may be able to alleviate a little bit as we move to AMI are also adding into the real water loss that we see.
But of course, as you said, this is something that we as an agency basically have complete control over. And one of the things that this board has wanted to do and been supportive of doing is increasing the amount of pipeline replacement to a great extent. And so I'd like to say, or I'd like to believe that reduction that we saw between last year and the year before has something to do with that this investment has something to do with those.
I don't know exactly what Caballeros was losing, but yes, that kind of thing is very possible if we have pipelines that are constant leakers or consistent leakers. That adds up very quickly, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's my neighborhood, Tockwitz River Estates, all the time.
So that goes to cost of service, right? That the pipeline replacement has to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yes, that speaks directly to cost of service. The pipeline replacements, that is within our budget every year. We have that budgeted line item right now. It's about $8 million per year that we budget, as well as what goes to cost of service is the water loss, because that is something that we pay for the production for, but we are not in turn gallon for gallon selling that water. So we are not receiving revenue for every single gallon because of that water loss. So that also is a cost of service.
Because it seems to me when I first got onto this board, we were doing like $3 million a year, something like that.
Yeah, it was about 3.5.
Yeah.
And now we're at 8. That's
It
correct.
was all in the plan to ramp up.
Yes.
And then it's also why we increased our fixed rate. That was the one big rate study that we did, the first one that we did, where we were trying to get our fixed rate in line with what it actually cost on the fixed purpose. So if we increased the amount of money that we're doing in pipeline, we would also have to increase our rate.
Right. Okay.
I could see a time when it was just cheaper to pay the electric bill and keep than trying to find leaks and fix it. Maybe we're at the point now. Is that something that might have happened, or you're going to say that never happened?
I think we realized it must have been back in 2015 we started to see a significant amount of leaks, and we correlated that to the unlined steel pipe. It's reached its life, and so we started this program of when I started here, we did $1 million of pipeline replacement. Now it's $8 million. Of course, it was for $1 million back in 1995, 2000. You did a certain amount of length of pipe, but we realized that our system, a significant amount of our system had reached its life, and we needed to ramp that up. And the board, that's when they said, all right, we'll go to 3.5 and then we'll go to $8 million, and we may need to go more, but there was a plan to have it within, it was a 20-year plan.
Right. And so if the board, if we did that, do you think you'd see drops in these numbers, or are we just going to be
I
replacing?
think that
pipe
is what you are seeing is when
Okay.
when you see
So
a
it is
pipeline
working.
get, I definitely see, yes, it
Okay.
is working. The problem that we do have is that each year, a pipe that was, the pipes are getting older and older, and you were battling the city of Palm Springs street rehabilitation projects, which currently right now we have a project, a street that the city is repaving, and we had what, 8 leaks on one pipe because of the vibration.
Yeah.
And we try to work with the city, but sometimes they're able to do more paving than we can
Right.
construct.
And that's because we don't have the money or haven't.
We have to design a pipeline, and that takes
Right.
about 6 months to do a design. Asphalt rehabilitation is contractor, we want to strip
Right.
that and lay the asphalt. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
boom.
yeah.
And there's not much design to that.
And the city ramped up all the street repaving with the Measure J fund. So they're doing a lot more streets than they ever did before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they got that Measure J money.
Okay.
Okay.
Right?
All right. We're ready for the next slide. All right. So this is one that it's hard to explain. So I'm going to do my best. It's split up over a few slides, but these are what I'm calling the landscape area measurement audits. So DWR the Department of Water Resources did flyovers and aerial landscape measurement of DWA's residential service areas in 2016 and 2020. The ones that we are utilizing now, the more current ones, are the 2020, but we were in that pilot project in 2016. So they gave us and essentially assigned us what they call our irrigable area. For the purpose of simplifying, it's about 80 million square feet for all of our residential parcels. The commercial data is yet to come. We're hoping to get that later this year. But we have that about 80 million square feet. And the urban water use objective is generally seen to be more harsh for inland and hot communities. So us being fairly far inland and definitely hot, we are trying to make sure, especially when we get that more detailed data from the state regarding the commercial landscape, that we really audit it and make sure that there isn't a systemic error or something like that about how exactly desert landscapes, for example, were counted, or if there are issues with specific parcels. The hope being that either we can speak with DWR or the State Water Resources Control Board and get some kind of relief regarding our irrigable area, or that we may have to go out to a landscape analysis company, like, for example, the one who did it for the state was NV5, and they may have to write a new machine learning algorithm that better identifies something like, for example, desert landscaping compared to native desert. It is a complicated issue, but we are hopeful that when the state gets that commercial data to us, that we're better able to account for that. Did I lose anyone there?
Not yet.
All right. Sorry, I've had to try to explain this. Sorry. Anyway, I've explained it several times, so I'm hoping that I'm getting better at it. Can we go to the next slide? So this is kind of what I'm talking about a little bit. So you can't really see the detailed numbers on there, but on the right side of that is what DWR provided us for the flyover of our residential parcels. And again, you can't really read the numbers, but just for the sake of argument, they found this particular parcel to be about 4,729 square feet of irrigable area, including, so not including that pool, which they did measure separately, but 4,729 square feet of irrigable area. That is not what we got. So when I go back and I measure the same parcel, we get 6160. Now the issue that we have come to with the state is that their claim, or Eagle Aerial and NV5's claim, has tended to be that every parcel is wrong. And if you look at every parcel, they know every parcel is wrong. But when you average all the mistakes in every parcel together, it's right. So it, it sort of doesn't get you anywhere to analyze a specific parcel necessarily, but this is sort of what I'm talking about. So for example, if you look at the far left where that sort of desert landscaping on the front of the property, are we counting the areas between those plants when it's a little bit sparser? Are we being too harshly graded regarding desert landscaping? When we're taking out grass and replacing it with something like that, are we actually hurting ourselves more than we think? So those are the types of questions that I hope we're better able to answer as we get better data. And I'm hoping that we do get that data from the commercial landscape data set later this year. And then we pursue if we need to talk more about this regarding the residential landscape area data set.
So on their example here, you're saying there's 6,000 square feet of grass here?
6,000 square feet of landscaping was my
okay.
sort of
Everything.
guess. Not guess. That was what I calculated based on what I could see on their property.
It's 30% different. How do they explain that? I mean, little error I could understand.
Yeah. So, and we've had that conversation several times, and to simplify, the answer we got was what I gave you. It says essentially they think that when their heirs, hey, we have a lot of that we actually gave you more credit on or something to that effect, and they will say that they are confident with their data within 5% of the actual. And I'm sure that is the case, but we also need to remember, or I think it's important to remember, that their data set was the entire state and not our local service area. So if there was an issue with desert communities in particular, it could be that there's a bigger discrepancy there that they're not accounting for. Or at least I will say that that's something I think is worth pursuing on our end.
So was this done by a helicopter or a drone? Do we know?
I'm not 100% sure. I believe it was a plane that they actually had going all over the state. So they did what they called our flyovers, and they're using that data set from 2020 to do all of this analysis. Wow. So they did the whole state in 2020, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're going to do another analysis. You said that we'd be seeking better data?
Potentially. So I think that what we are actually going to do is essentially we're going to do an audit internally and determine if we think that there is a potentially worthwhile case for us to do another analysis. I will also say that if we're going to do another analysis, that may be something that we want to pursue grant funding on, so it may take a little bit. But it is something that sometimes this kind of better data and scientific approach to things has a good case for grants that we don't normally get. So that would be my hope, at least.
And if your analysis was helpful, what do you do with that? Do you present it to them and ask for a...
Yeah, so essentially what we would do is we would put in an alternative data request with the state. So we would tell the state that, hey, we've done an analysis of this flyover that is more reflective of our local conditions. And then we would have to justify that in the state process. We would have to do a posting so that the public could comment on our process if they would like to. And then we would go to we would essentially get a decision from the State Water Resources Control Board and consult with DWR on if what we did meets their criteria. But I think that if we can prove that our conditions are better reflected by our local analysis, that's the kind of data they're looking for.
I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, well, yeah, we're making mistakes that are, where we're undercounting, but we're overcounting, but there's no way to, I don't understand, and there's no way to prove that you're somehow, we gave you too much credit over here and not enough over here, but somehow it's going to average out.
I will say it does not make intuitive sense to me either, and this is part of why I think that it might be worthwhile to pursue it a little bit further, but I wanted to do it with the more detailed data set. Actually, I have maybe an example of that might give a little bit of an explanation of what I'm trying to get at on the next page, but essentially that it's going to give us a better idea of what they're counting versus not counting. So I don't know if you're able to go to the next page. Oh, maybe small on your printouts and maybe small here, excuse me. But on this, so they're essentially, if this is all within a layer for this specific property, the examples, state hasn't released anything yet to my knowledge, so the examples are not perfect. But essentially, they're taking this building, they're identifying, hey, in orange, that's a building. In black, they have all the parking lot. And in green, they are specifically labeling what they have actually classified as landscaping. So what I would like to do is look at a few of these in particular for our service area when the state releases this data set and see what they're counting as landscaping compared to what we might count as landscaping, and see if there is potentially a worthwhile case for us to do more analysis or to work with a company to do that analysis on our behalf.
There are companies out there that will do that? Just give them money?
Yes, so there's a lot of companies that will essentially this is taking, geospatial information out of imagery. There are a lot of companies that will do that. We'd have to pursue what the best option is for us in our particular use case, but.
I see a use for AI here.
I will assume that most of them are using AI, but they probably know how to use it better for this than I do. So this is another case for us, though, of getting better data that better serves our local community, like the Simis station. All right.
Okay.
Next slide. Yep. I'm going to hand it back over to Ernie. This is another program that he has definitely taken over, so I will let him do his thing.
I'm back. Okay, so this is compliance option number 8, HOA and commercial, industrial, institutional water walkthroughs. I'll start this portion of the presentation by saying I love my job because it allows me an opportunity to educate myself, but doing these walkthroughs gives me the chance to actually, at the same time as I'm educating myself, educate customers. Because as I mentioned before, it's not that they lack any desire to conserve water. Sometimes it's just they need direction, or they need information, they need details. And so what we want to do, because we want to be as efficient and practical with our resources as possible, is water walkthroughs that we offer to our customers. As much as possible, we want to target the biggest water users, right? And find out why they're using so much water, because we see that as a potential for us to impact them, tell them what they can do to conserve water, get their water use down, which eventually results in helping us reach our urban water use objective. So this is actually a fun one for me. If I could clone myself, I'd have 2 of me. I'd get hired on with Desert Water Agency once again, and then I'd go out and do more water walkthroughs. But there's only one of me. So we want to make sure that we're connecting the dots when we meet with these customers. And oftentimes what I see is that there's not only a lack of understanding as to where our water comes from. Sure, you go inside your house, you turn on your sprinklers, there's the water, but where does that come from? And I see it as a disservice for us to go out and meet with customers and not take the time to explain to them these 60 or so years of Desert Water Agency's efforts to make relationships across the state to coordinate with Metropolitan to exchange water so that we can receive water here, so that we can import it here, and our customers have no idea. So what I've been seeing is that they don't have the day-to-day water knowledge that we have here in this room because they don't deal with it like we do. If you go up to someone in the street and ask them how many gallons are in an acre foot, they're not going to answer it like Clark did and just and just give you that information, right? So, and the point is, when we meet with them, we want to educate them on the legislation that's out there right now. Making conservation a California way of life. That's one of them, right? AB 1572, that's another one they're not the same, but they're adjacent and they're connected at the hip. They influence each other. You can't get to your urban water use objective without realizing that our customers, especially the ones using a lot of water, whether it's commercial or HOAs, play a major role in that. And so we want to make sure that we are working hard to bridge that gap. And so we want to think big and plan smart. So we reach out to some of our biggest water users, and we'll continue to do that so that we can give them the tools, resources, talk to them about ways to conserve water. And if we can go to the next slide, and then I'll allow some time for questions, but this is what I'm getting at. What we want to do is we want to turn our water customers into stakeholders, get them invested, realize how much work Desert Water Agency does to get water imported here to replenish our basin, and our partners do the same as well. And so what we do is we try to explain from start to finish where they are in the big picture of things. We start with a conversation as simple as like, hey, where the Sierra Nevadas, how does that impact you here, right? Does the snowmelt actually trickle all the way down here? No, but there's a complex system that eventually gets us to a point where we can exchange that water with Metropolitan through a relationship that we've built over years, and then all of a sudden we're able to import that water into the valley. It replenishes. There's replenishment ponds. We talk about natural recharge that occurs here locally. We really connect them, let them know where that water comes from. And then we explain that Desert Water Agency plays a role in maintaining our systems to reduce water waste or water loss. We drill wells and maintain them so that we can provide a reliable water supply for our customers. And to cap it off, we then explain the urban water use objective. Then we talk about AB 1572. And after they've realized all the work that Desert Water Agency goes through to get this high quality water in here, have it go through the aquifer over many, many years, purify itself so that we can pull it up and then irrigate non-functional turf. It sounds a little backwards, right? So it's a matter of connecting with these big customers. All customers matter, of course, but in terms of being pragmatic, we need to make sure that we focus on the areas that we really need attention on. We can go to the next slide. Am I stuck to this podium, or can I take this off? Okay, great. I'm going to sing a song. I'm not, I'm just kidding. So when I mentioned that we have a data-based approach when we perform these water walkthroughs, we mean it. We bring at least 5 years of water use data for a property, and it could be a hotel, it could be a HOA property, it could be a hospital, because they each have different systems, right? Complexities, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, as we mentioned before. If I go to an HOA, typically the highest water use is going to be their irrigation system, right? So their sprinkler system, we look at that. If I go to a hospital, it could be their cooling system, cooling tower, how many of them? How much water is it using? What is it dedicated towards? Hotels. Can anyone tell me what one of the biggest indoor water use appliances is in a hotel room? Toilets. Toilets are the biggest culprits, right? They can leak. And then what I've heard is from people who have done hundreds of these audits is that the cleaning staff, often when they come clean the room, they flush the toilet like 3 times. So it's as simple as even educating the staff when we show up to do these water walkthroughs. But I love showing customers their water use data on this line graph, because I always tell them, if I didn't speak to you for 10 years, but all of a sudden I looked up your water data, I could tell what's going on at the property. I don't have to talk to you. This one specifically happened to be an HOA. And you can see the peaks and valleys here over the years. And you can start identifying either a trend or some odd scenarios where you're like, what happened here? That blue block that's towards the left side of the graph, for an HOA, that tends to be their overseeding period. Okay? If you look at the top of the graph, you notice the degrees, the temperature. Just when it's supposed to be cooling off, we see water use go up. Why is that? We just talked about all the work we go through to import water here, and now we're going to crank up the water when it's getting cooler so that we can get this new seed to germinate. So that's why it's important for us to meet with customers and explain to them the impact this has not only on our water, but on their bill too. If we notice here, there's a giant spike in water use, like really big. Well, what would happen if we just eliminated that and followed this trend that we have here towards the middle? it's feasible. This customer ended up telling us that, yeah, they've done that before. They've decided to skip overseeding. And we talk about the money that they dedicate to overseeding. And if they put that aside instead and saved it for a future grass conversion project, how much water would that save? How much money would that save? How much water would it save for the agency? And how would it help us reach those objectives? So this directly impacts what we're trying to do. If we look on the left side of the screen, we have this spike. When we were looking at the data, we really had a hard time identifying what had happened there. And it turns out they had a big leak. And as we continue to improve our systems, Clark mentioned AMI and a few other resources that we're hoping to roll out. Customers will be able to connect with their water use on a more frequent basis so that they could eliminate the spike, right? Get rid of it. There's no need for us to be wasting that water. They don't want to do it. They just didn't know about it. Okay, and we're working towards those checkpoints as an agency. But we do see that spike. It drops down while they're fixing the leak. So you see it drop. And then they panic probably because their plants are like getting brown and then they just spike it up again. But you see that story there. And so we bring this information. It's tangible. It gets our customers connected with their water use. And I'll pause there in case anyone has questions on the last 3 slides.
So I'll go. You're talking about what, sending emails to people when their usage hits a certain, unusual draw? Is that something that's with this new system you guys have? Is that something you're considering or not?
That sounds like an AMI question.
Yeah.
And sure, I mean, the goal would be within reason to help provide customers with the tools to identify it themselves. But if we notice something, we can definitely.
Can you do that automatically? I mean, I'm not suggesting we do that, but if you could, maybe I'd say, why don't we try that? I don't know.
So we have not yet gotten to that part as far as the automation process. So that's something that we would definitely be looking into as to if that is a possibility or whether and if our current systems that we have do not have that capability, the potential to find another system to plug in to be able to do that sort of a thing. So those are all options on the table for us to investigate.
Well, it seems like I wouldn't mind getting an email that said, hey, use 10%, or it would take more than 10% to trigger, I would hope. But you're going to have leak notifications, I guess. I don't know what would trigger that. A usage of double?
There are portals that we're looking into that would work side by side with AMI that you could customize and tell it what sort of threshold you need. If it's a 10% or if it's a 15% or 5%, it would then start to trigger notifications, whether it's email or other. So there are tools there, and we're investigating that, but we're just not there yet. Okay. But we're building towards it.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions on this portion? No? I think there might be one more. Okay, great. So Clark has gone through the trouble of really detailing this presentation out for us to enjoy. It's concise, right? And so he mentions these 9 compliance objectives. I want to point out that focusing on these large water using customers, HOAs and commercial, industrial, institutional properties, hits 5 of the 9 compliance options in the sense that it's impacting those categories in one way or another. By showing up and performing these water walkthroughs for customers, we could educate them on grass removal incentive programs. They could apply and they could drastically reduce their water use. Direct device installation, if we end up going that direction. Again, the water walkthroughs would be a great opportunity to educate our customers. Non-functional turf and the ordinance, major part of what we want to do to get customers ready for compliance. HOA walkthroughs, that's the program in itself, and education across the board. In studying for one of my AWWA tests, it mentioned that education itself was associated with 10% of water savings potential. So by simply educating people, connecting people, letting them know what role they play in the big picture, why they matter. You know, we have a big seasonal population, and we want to make sure that we educate those customers as well. They're just as important.
About how many of these walkthroughs are you two doing in an average week?
Lately, it's been really busy with objectives like what you see in front of you, but typically we would, if we're both operating at the same time, you could do 3-4 walkthroughs a week.
Okay.
Keep in mind, these walkthroughs require preparation time because we bring these great reports to customers. It can be a 2-hour meeting on site with the customer. Once the water walkthrough is done, we will also follow up and send them a post report.
Do you have a backlog of people?
Oh, yeah.
What is that backlog, do you think?
We right now have about 10 audits that we are having to say, hey, let us get back to you. So there's a lot of potential out there, a lot of desire. And again, we're working to educate these customers.
As I recall in the budget hearing, we have one position being added. Is that right? Am I
That
wrong
is
about
correct.
that?
Yes, there is an additional conservation individual position being added to the budget to be able to bolster up those activities and the labor, the resources available to do that. And of course, in the future, you know, this is all, we have a long-term game that we have to play
Right.
here, you know, and so it's not, all of these things can't be achieved all at once. You know, so there's going to be a ramping up. And so we're going to be evaluating as time goes on what resources are going to be needed in order to do the things that we need to do to meet these objectives.
So in the opening comments, I heard it said that if we achieve 1% reduction, we could possibly, is that what I heard? Am I here? Do I remember that right?
Talking about the alternate-
If we achieve 1% per year, we might avoid the gallows.
Yeah, so that would be the alternative compliance pathway. So that does help us stay in compliance year to year with the huge caveat that we still have to hit the number at the end. So if we only
Oh.
save 16% at the end, we still have a huge amount of savings needed. So that alternative compliance pathway is meant to give us that time to implement programs and actually get to the right place at the end.
Okay.
It just kicks it down the road, right? Just kicking the can down the road,
just
really.
wondering, it
Right.
doesn't sound to me like this is possible using their numbers from their flyovers. You can't, we can't get there. Or we can. I mean, you're out there as a professional doing this. Is it possible to get there?
I think I've always said that this is going to be a huge lift for this
Okay,
community.
that's all
This
right.
is not going to be easy, and and I think Clark, you made this comment yesterday, and I think it's in your presentation today as well. That in fact, I will read it. One moment.
I just think of that guy playing with his kid. The grass isn't going to be able to do that anymore. And that is a,
Well, I think these are gonna be lifestyle changes. I mean, this is what I was looking for. Meeting the urban water use objective will be politically, financially, administratively, and programmatically complex. And I have said this for 2 years, about the last 2 years after Ashley Metzger and I went up to comment on this at the State Water Resources Control Board meeting, along with a lot of other water agencies who've said a lot of the same things. And this is going to really change the face of what this community looks like. It's going to have to, whether you like that or not. I mean, it's built into this number. This 42% it's not going to just happen. I think we can get there, but it's really going to be hard. And I'll pick on the airport. You know?
City
You
Hall.
cannot have that, you cannot have that kind of turf program at the airport and make our number. It's not going to happen. And the city will be subject to fines if that doesn't happen, right?
But
Who gets fined? What happens if we don't? What's the, let's say we do
We
everything
get
we can do. Who gets fined?
Oh, you,
Yeah.
Meet our objective, we get fined.
The agency, $10,000 a day, right? Or,
well, if it's in the drought time, so
can that go to cost of service?
it is. It's definitely cost of
Yes,
service.
that will any fines would also go to, that is a cost that we have to pay. That would be a cost of service, and we have to be able to pay that somehow, and that would come through the rates.
I believe I asked that. It's so true, though. It's like,
Yeah. And that's been my issue for a long time is that, you know, if we as an agency are getting fined, whether it's $1,000 a day because it's a non-drought period, or it's $10,000 a day because it's a non-drought period. I mean, I've heard at various conferences where agencies will say, oh, we were just going to pay the fine. Well, that's $365,000 in 1 year, or in a drought year, it would be $3.65 million. And that goes back into the rate, and everybody who pays that rate is going to pay that fine directly and indirectly, regardless of whether they are doing all these things that we're trying to encourage them to do. Right? So the water wasters are basically paying the fine, and so are the people who are conserving. It's not fair.
Yeah, and to add on to the discussion around the potential fines, I think that the other avenue within the regulation that could end up happening would be that the state would essentially step in and decide for us what conservation programs we should be running and how we should be running them, and we just lose control over our own destiny in that respect. So that would be something I would very much like to avoid.
I think we all would
Yeah.
like to avoid that. All right, so you gonna bring it home?
All right. Yes, I have one more slide, and then it's discussion, which I think we've had a lot of. But at this point, so the kind of final thing is our public education and outreach, and we have a tremendously hardworking public affairs team who does a lot to get our word out there and work with us. Ernie kind of mentioned the walkthroughs, which we as conservation do, but as far as our advertising, as far as our events, public affairs has been really tremendous about getting the word out there and really helping us with a lot of these programs. I will say that, for example, in this year, we had an issue for our grass removal program getting city funding. It kind of created a brief pause for us. And because we didn't really have funding, we paused our advertising, and it led to kind of a 75% drop in our single family because we weren't able to target that really important October timeframe when a lot of people are starting to think about grass removal. So to me, the advertising we do of our programs is what keeps it in people's minds and really drives home the success that we see in conservation so far. So hopefully I've instilled in you the importance of this, to me at least. In addition to what we are already doing as far as that kind of thing, we're also hoping that we're going to have this AMI customer portal that's going to allow customers to see their high bills, to see their leaks much sooner, and allow staff to assist with those much sooner. So now we kind of have to wait a little bit, potentially as much as a month, before we actually see some of these indications of things like leaks and high bills. Once we have AMI implementation, that may be down to a few days. So there will be a lot more active feedback about what is actually happening on each individual property. We can potentially get the word out there, email people, call them with a degree of immediacy. I, again, want to mention that just having this access alone, other water agencies have found it saves a few percentage points, and we need a few percentage points where we can get them. But yeah, hoping to have that launched along with our AMI system and have that available to customers, but it will be a big advertising lift to get our customers actually signed up and utilizing that software. Public affairs staff is also working on a companion document to our implementation plan here. That companion document will be the communications plan, but essentially it's going to go over all of our needs as far as what we need to do to keep our public informed, and not just public as in our customers, but public as in elected officials, state officials, legislative officials, keep them enterprised of our challenges and potentially get relief where we can, and have other stakeholders and other partners where we can to ensure that we are taking advantage of every option that we have. So it's not just our customers necessarily, it's the other people who have an effect on this type of thing. So public education and outreach it's impossible to do this without it. So it's very important to actually getting to where we are and keeping our program successful. Any questions regarding that?
Can I go back to water loss?
With the next slide's discussion, so you go back to whatever you like.
Also, I'm remembering that during our budget meeting, we approved to present to the board the addition of an engineering position. And I'm wondering if that will, by doing that, and if we, as a board, decide we want to do more, if we can, I don't want to put any undue expectations on anybody here, but to enhance our pipeline replacement, if that's potentially going to be helpful, even beyond where we're at right now, because apparently it looks like that would be helpful if we had fewer leaks in our pipeline. Is that right? I'm
Yeah. So definitely. So, and I think that engineering has a lot of demands on them. So it's not always just pipeline replacement, but where that a new position can help with that. And maybe that's a project further down the road, depending on who gets hired. But yes, absolutely. Whatever we can do to help. And kind of as Director Ortega alluded to, this is a huge lift. I do think it is possible, so I don't want to make it sound like it's so daunting that it's impossible, but it means that we need to do everything we're doing, and we need to do more. So there is kind of that accelerated aspect to it, but yes, wherever we can get additional help, like a pipeline replacement, an engineer that's ready to do that, or even having our current engineers step up into more of those projects where they're able to, I think that's to our benefit. I don't know if anyone wants to add something. I probably just took the floor on that.
No, you did great, Clark. But
All right.
absolutely, that's the intent, is to be able to do more design.
I'm of the opinion that the more we invest in our system, the more valuable it is to our community, and if it reduces on this on our water usage, it's benefits everybody. I've said before, I'm familiar with another system that didn't make those investments, and it's a train wreck. So, it's almost like, I'm tempted to say, let's take a look at that. I don't think we had more money going into pipeline replacement in this budget, but down the road, I guess maybe we could take a look at that.
Yes, you're correct. There was no additional money in pipeline replacements, but as you recall in the budget meeting that we had yesterday, we still have pipelines that are still being designed, still funded, but yet aren't yet complete. So, we're a little bit behind because of staffing constraints. It takes a lot of time to design those pipelines and manage them, managing the contractors and managing the project. So we are beefing up our staffing to be able to rise up to the level that we need for our current level of desired pipeline replacement, but definitely an area where in the future investment would be beneficial. We also do have other constraints here at the agencies, such as spacing. Where do you put the body? So we have plans to expand our office space and everything that that's underway. But we're just not there yet. So there's this timing thing that has to be taken into consideration as well, but we are definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah, my past experience is there was a bunch of engineers working in a trailer, and I don't want to see that happen, of course, because they never got out of that trailer. They're still in that trailer. And the other guys in engineering don't even have walls in their offices. I'm not kidding. Have you, anyway, I won't pick on
Yeah,
them
we
any
don't-
further.
we don't
but
need to
for
worry about
God's
that.
sakes, let's not go down that road.
But the other part of the investment too, of course, is something like AMI. I mean, that's not replacing pipelines, but that's providing technology to our agency that is also going to help us. So the investment is not just in the pipeline itself, but in the things that support the network.
If I may, to add on to that, you're absolutely correct, Dr. Ortega. There are investments that the agency has been strategically making over the past several years to be able to have the technology and infrastructure in place to do the things that we need to do, such as the AMI that came with doing the advanced meter reading component of it, investing in replacing, putting that smart device on each of our meters, and investing in the advanced metering infrastructure. That all that investment has been made, and we are in the process of implementing it. So there has been a lot of investment already that this district has made to put us in a great place to be able to rise to the challenge that we are. So I do not believe that we're starting from square one here. We are definitely have a good head start, having GIS in place, having that program that's ramping up, and we're getting more skilled there. And also in the budget for this upcoming year, we have another staff member included with that as well, so we can build that part out too. So we are getting that support there, and we have the tools to be able to do this. We may need some more. We may need more investment, more engineers. We may need more pipeline replacements, but we are on a good path as far as momentum going. But we are going to have to, as Clark said, do more.
Where does repair come? What department does repair fall under? Is that construction?
Construction does the repairs, yes.
And so when people go out, when someone from the construction department goes out to fix a leak, like how much money are we potentially spend, or do you think we might be spending in a year on just that?
Well, we can break that down unless
Well, I mean,
finance
yeah,
director science has that, but
she usually
That figure
does.
I do not have.
one thing that we can provide for you is we break down the hours,
Yes, right.
and I think one crew is cost how much.
We have the figures to be able to determine how much that is. That is just not a figure that I have
Yeah.
available.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just saying
but
that
it's possible to-
as we do more pipeline replacement, theoretically, we do less repair, and that's money that, again, could be directed elsewhere,
That's correct.
maybe towards
And-
pipeline replacement.
I will akin back to several years ago. I was doing a master's program, and I did a study on this where we saw, overtime, and overtime has been decreasing because of the way that, what I assume to be advanced acceleration of our pipeline replacements, as well as, different strategic decisions. But so there's been a lot less of that after hours work. And also, I believe that we've seen a decrease in the amount of hours that we have spent on these repairs as well.
Didn't we add a
Yeah.
extra crew too?
We
Mhm.
did.
Back in like 2017, 16, 17?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other program that we put in place, we had a 5-year plan to replace all of the PE services.
Yeah.
The PE services, what we found was that when those break, it's not a tiny hole, it's a complete failure. And that's a lot of volume of water through a 1 or 2 inch PVC pipe. We have now completed that program. All the PE services that we know of have been replaced in our system, and that has helped tremendously as far as those dramatic breaks that we were experiencing.
Okay.
So, just quickly, what's the process for rising up on the list? I know President Ortega's mentioned a particular stretch 5 times. What's it take for that stretch, and I'm not suggesting that it should jump ahead, but how does that work? Is it strictly based on how many times it busts loose?
So currently, we have a database where we track all the leaks and we put leaks per linear foot, and there's a point assigned to it. So, and then we also include a financial component because if it's a very difficult leak on, say, Vistachino or Indian Canyon, that's included in the component to figure out how the leaks are, what it costs. So there's a ranking. So we do have a ranking. And in 2020, we came up with a 5-year plan of ranking all of our streets. So we've done that, and we're in the process of reevaluating that plan for the next 5 years. And that's meant to align with the city's paving as best we can. And so we're in coordination with the city. They're telling us, hey, we're going to pave these streets in these certain years, and we're trying to get in there either before or strategically after, because they've said they're going to come in and re-slurry the street after 5 years. So if we can't put the new pipeline within before they pave, then we put it on the back of the list, and it hopefully it'll come back up before they slurry again in the next 5 years. So we have gone through all the streets that have unlined steel pipe, and we've assigned them an area. So neighborhood, we're going to replace all the mains in this neighborhood, and we've coordinated that with the city's paving plan. So that was 5 years ago. We've been sticking to it, and we're at the point where we're going to reevaluate. It's been 5 years, and look at it again and see if it still makes sense. And
If I may, I think when we see that leak report and we see, scheduled for replacement, we see winter 2024 and so on. It's a little bit out of date. I think there's an argument to be made that we reprogram all of these, going forward. It's the same thing with the budget. There's like $30 million in unspent pipeline replacement money. It's been voted, it's been set aside, but the work has not been done. I think if you do the exercise you're talking about now, it calls for a whole reprogramming of pipeline replacement, starting with today, and look at what we do next. And if you program it, you will drop out of that the labor requirements, the engineering requirements, the financial requirements. I think it's time to do a complete study on what we need to be doing. And if it can be accelerated, I know there's roadblocks. We have the Corps of Engineers roadblock on Caballeros. We have a Caltrans roadblock on Vistachino. Let's look at the realistic time frame for getting those out of the way and getting that piece of work done, and program the next 5 years. And I think it's time to do that.
yeah, I was just discussing that with the engineering manager, that the names don't make sense, but the issue is we're coming up with a plan, and it says we're going to budget. So it starts off with you'll see like a $25,000 budget for design, and we earmark that. So then we get the design money, and then we pick the streets. And so we can't give it a name based on the Los Compadres or something like that, some neighborhood, because we don't really know the neighborhood when we say we're going to do the design. We just we know we're earmarking this. We're going to start a design. We have about $4 or $5 million to plan it. And the names don't make sense. By the time you roll out, where we're saying the name is based on when we come up with the budget for design. And so we were talking about coming up with a better way. That
I'm sure that the great minds in the engineering department can come up with a way of categorizing it or naming it. It's that shouldn't be an issue, really. It shouldn't.
All right, I think some of us need to get leaving.
Yeah, I need to.
Need to leave. So, thank you. This was great. This was really so well thought out and planned and informative, and I'm very impressed. Thank you all.
Very good. I understand everything much better now.
Yay.
I concur in the remaining time we have. It's a great piece of work by your team and you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to give all the kudos to the conservation team and Clark for slaving away at 70 pages of an implementation plan. So we really appreciate your feedback as well as how engaged everybody was today. This is helpful for us as we move the plan over to the Public Affairs Department and on to the next steps, as well as the ordinance coming to you, the non-functional turf ordinance coming to you in early July. So.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Recording stopped.